With that, I'd like to introduce the new executive director of the National Association of Pretrial Services Agencies, Wendy Venvertloh. Welcome to Justice Speaks, Wendy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're delighted to have you, and I'd like to start this interview by asking you to tell me a little about yourself and your career before you became the executive director.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been really quite blessed in this space. I've been in community corrections in general for just had my 25th anniversary this month. I started off not right out of college, not realizing that this is where I would end up at all. I thought, and actually my plan and what I was actively planning for was to go back to graduate school to get my PhD. And in the meantime, came home from college to be with my family and took a job that I had been told had a good working environment and was also in criminal justice, which I knew I wanted to end up somewhere there. And it was one of the greatest blessings of my life to work at the Adams County, Illinois Probation Department. I worked for two amazing leaders. One, Mike, who really led with a desire to positively impact and base the impact upon research and science. And then my chief, Chuck, really led with heart. And I was actually thinking about that this morning as I was taking my daughter to school, that having that early impact really both spoke to me and is why I stayed there for 21 years and eventually became the director of the department, but really laid the groundwork for who I am today. I believe very much in legal and evidence-based practices, research, science, and basing our decision-making on that. But I also believe in leading with heart. And so anyway, kind of fast forward, as I said, I worked as a probation officer for 16 years in Adams County, became the director of the department, and then during that managed adult and juvenile probation, a juvenile detention center, and as well started the pretrial program in Adams County. And then following that, during COVID, when things were, the world was changing and the state of Illinois pretrial reform had really started rolling in about 2016, 2017,
Mhm.
there was the opportunity for me to join the state. And so in July of 2020, like I said, in the heart of COVID, joined the state and became the pretrial administrator for the Administrative Office of the Courts in
That was
Illinois.
a very
Yeah,
challenging time.
absolutely. A
Running
lot has
running a
happened in those
pretrial
last 4 years.
yeah, running a pretrial program during COVID must have been very challenging.
Running the whole department. And when I was with Adams County, particularly the congregate living at the juvenile detention center, as everyone faced, was a really difficult thing. And then coming to the state during COVID, when everybody was in a brand new world of Zoom meetings and virtual introductions and that kind of thing, but also the laws were changing in Illinois. Pretrial reform was gaining steam, and so anyway, it was an exciting and challenging time, and I learned a lot while I was there.
Okay, and how did the transition to the new position occur?
Well, while I was with Illinois, as I said, or as I mentioned, the law changed. Illinois became the first state to abolish cash bail in the country, and so I was part of the executive team that led that change for the Administrative Office of the Courts. So I started as the pretrial administrator for the Administrative Office of the Courts, and then during the transition and evolution in Illinois, a statewide pretrial office was created, and I was appointed as deputy director of that office. So we oversaw not only the implementation of the law for the courts, but we also oversaw the building of the pretrial organization that currently serves right around not quite 80 counties out of 102 in the state of Illinois. And prior to that, prior to its inception a couple of years ago, it didn't exist. So they were serving 0 counties out of
Really?
102. So yeah, in a couple of years' time, we implemented that. I was part of that executive team that implemented that. So I think that was part of it. You know, part of being a pretrial practitioner in Illinois with so much going on is I had the pleasure and the honor of serving on the pretrial executive network for the National Institute of Corrections. And so really got to meet a lot of wonderful folks and to be exposed to the national conversation as well. And I think, you know, that and by grace, the NAPSA chose me as their executive director, and I'm so honored and excited to be in this position.
And that happened this year, is that correct?
Yes, I just started as the executive director August 5th of 2024, and as of this recording, that's only been about 6 weeks.
Congratulations. I'm just
Yeah,
delighted we caught you in the beginning of this.
yeah, thank you so much.
Tell us a little about the National Association of Pretrial Service Agencies, will you please?
Yeah, again, such an honor to serve as the executive director. NAPSA has been around now for 51 years. And so, you know, founded in 1973. I think, you know, out of the 1960s, there was quite a bit of bail reform. And so I think the momentum, again, as I kind of talked about in Illinois, the momentum was moving back then. The organization was founded in 1973, and it's been really active, again, for 50 years now, 51 years. And what we really focus on is providing best practices, information, providing standards. We have NAPSA standards that provide guidelines based upon legal and evidence-based practices, so that folks can set up highly functioning pretrial systems and pretrial services in their counties. So that's really where our knowledge base and where we stand. And then with that, we work heavily in education, in technical assistance, in providing guidance to practitioners and other folks that would seek to implement pretrial services.
As part of that educational program, you have a conference, right?
We do. We actually just held our 51st annual conference in New Orleans, Louisiana, this month, and wonderful opportunity for people to get together and have some great learning opportunities that they wouldn't always have. And I'm proud to say we had record attendance, and the conference just continues to grow, and the momentum continues to grow.
I had the privilege of being at one of your conferences a long time ago, and it was in Florida, and it was a wonderful conference at the time.
Wonderful.
Well, I'm certain it's gotten better. So let me say, so basically, I understand what you're telling me. The National Association of Pretrial Services Agency has worked to develop standards and to educate people throughout the country on what best practices are, so that we can improve the criminal justice system. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Good, good. So how do you see your current job in that function?
Well, my current job, and this is really, you know, if you ask me a year from now or 5 years from now, I'm sure that
It'll
this
be
answer
different.
will change. Yeah, but having only been here 6 weeks, obviously this is a big time of transition for the organization. If you simply think of a change in executive director alone, we were led by a longtime executive director and who did a wonderful job, grew the organization, and now we are in that period of evolution with a new leader. You know, the board obviously has new members that come on each year, and so we're currently assessing our strengths and looking for opportunities for growth and development in the next year, especially is kind of where we're focused on, and for years to come.
Okay, now where's your next conference, by the way?
And it's going to be in Atlanta in September of 2025.
Oh, Atlanta in September is not a bad place to be.
Right.
Good choice.
Yeah.
I want to shift a little bit, and because some people may not be as familiar with the role of pretrial service agencies in the American criminal justice system. So can you talk about that a little, what the role is?
Yeah, that'd be, I know it is often confused or almost like silent or misunderstood part of the criminal justice system. So pretrial services plays two key roles. Both are aimed at maintaining the positive function and the efficiency and effectiveness of the system. So first, pretrial services is there at the very, very beginning of the criminal justice system following someone's arrest. Pretrial services would provide background information to the court system to allow the court to make an informed decision based upon factual information on whether or not that the person before the court is ready to be released from custody, if they're in custody,
So you're
or
talking
if they
about
pose.
pretrial release at a bond hearing. You
Yes.
file a report that's similar to a pre-sentence report, so that a judge will have more information, or a magistrate will have more information in order to make a better decision. Is that what I understand you to be saying?
Right. And so I think in some systems, there's a lack of information at that
Right.
stage. And so pretrial services fills that void. Doing an investigation is what many jurisdictions call it. They're at that initial decision of release or detention and providing information to the court about the individual before them so that the court can make a fully informed decision of release or detention.
I'm old enough to remember the days before such reports existed in Michigan. And what a wonderful transition that was, when suddenly you have information about an individual that helps you make a better decision. It's really an important factor in this whole criminal justice setting.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the biggest piece of what is often missing in systems.
And
And
the other thing that your people do, as I understand it, is they then, like a probation officer, but in a pretrial setting, they supervise the individual who's out on pretrial release, at least in some states. Am I correct in that?
yeah, yes. So when there's pretrial services present, and what we like to say is supporting the success or the likelihood of success for that individual that's being released. So most folks, the vast majority, are going to do well on their own or with just minor help. The greatest, most effective evidence-based practice in this area is court call reminders or reminders of appointments that are coming up. Just like I get my doctor's appointments texted to me on my phone, or my hair appointments texted to me on my phone. That is absolutely an evidence-based practice across the board. So most often, that's all that folks need to be successful. And then if there are other needs identified, yes, pretrial services can be there to help that individual with whatever that need might be, so that they could be successful during pretrial.
In fact, the notification piece that you were just talking about, there's research out there that suggests that that piece alone improves appearances by substantial numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It also improves satisfaction with the justice system by substantial numbers. And if you include within it a notification, within the notification, what the consequences are, it even improves both more. I'm fascinated by that. I was researching that the other day, and it really has a huge impact both on appearance and satisfaction. So yeah, that's an important thing to mention. So what you've been basically describing is what a pretrial services officer does. Is there anything beyond those things that you've mentioned that would be part of their job description?
Those are really the big pieces. What I used to say in my old organization was, the investigation, or, the supportive services, that kind of thing, either providing information to the courts at the very, very beginning, or supporting the defendant to be successful during pretrial release. Those are the big pieces. I mean, there may be some one-off things that folks do, but those are the big pieces.
Success in supervision, essentially, I would think then, for an individual pretrial service officer, would be the person appearing in court and not committing any new offenses while they're under supervision.
Right. It's a very, very different mindset
Mhm.
And back when I was the director of my department, I used to say, you need to have a different hat on if you're gonna. We had people that were dual role at that point, and so you really must adopt a different mindset because it is a completely different scenario. The person before you is not convicted of any crime; they're accused of a crime, but they are innocent until proven guilty. Whereas in a probation sense, the person has either admitted guilt or been found guilty, and now you're working on behavior change. With pretrial services, again, the presumption of innocence, the real goal is to help that person be successful during pretrial, which means, as you said, making sure that they attend their court dates and making sure that we do everything to support them to remain crime free, not be arrested for new offenses. So
So,
that's really the goals.
given that mindset, what do you look for if you're going to hire someone to be a pretrial service officer?
Yeah. So in my current role, I don't do that ananymore,
I
but I
know
used
that, but you
to
did.
many years experience with that. And the really, with time, it sort of changed. We had a provision in Illinois that required someone to have a bachelor's degree. Leaving that, so often we would talk about what courses did they study, what was their major.
Mhm.
So I don't believe that pretrial officers necessarily need to have a bachelor's degree. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're talking about what someone's background is, it doesn't really matter to me. What I care more about is their person-to-person skills, their ability to believe in the foundations of our criminal justice system, that innocence until proven guilty is where we stand at this point. This person has not been convicted, and treating them as that. And the real big piece that goes along with that is just being able to develop a personal relationship and have empathy and understand the individual as their humanity that is standing in front of you and working to help them and help the criminal justice system be successful.
Empathy is not a word you often hear out of criminal justice professionals in the United States. I like that. Um, I think
That
it's
would be, I think once I was taught that what a foundational piece that was to my personal work when I had a caseload of folks that I managed as a probation officer, empathy is the empathy is the heart of it all, at least in my opinion. That ability to understand where someone's at, and to be there with them and to help them see what the next right decision is, whether that's going to court, whether that is following through with a service that could help them. Empathy is key.
well, that sort of brings us to another topic, which is when I use the term, and you've used it in this interview, criminal justice reform. What does that mean from a pretrial services perspective?
I think it can mean quite a few things. So to narrow, because I've been thinking about that. We have a couple of things at play, I think, in our country when it comes to pretrial services or the pretrial phase. First, there's a misunderstanding of evidence, what really works. For example, I am lucky enough to have worked in the state of Illinois where cash bail was eliminated, but it is the only state where cash bail has been eliminated completely. Obviously, there's a couple of states that have really restricted that in a very positive way, and they're functioning well. But the vast majority of the country is still tying pretrial to success to money, which is simply there's no evidence to support that, and if anything, honestly, money makes it worse. It makes the problems of poverty, of the disparate impact on people of color, it makes it worse.
Yeah.
So that's one big piece that I am hopeful
So you
for.
really, and there's a huge pushback on what you're talking about. I mean, in New York, there was a real serious pushback on the idea of eliminating cash bail, which frankly, most people don't understand. I mean, and cash bail is becoming the exception. It is not yet the exception, but it's becoming the exception rather than the rule. In Michigan, what they call personal bond, you set a number on it, $10,000 personal bond. They don't post anything, it's personal bond. But that's more common, at least in Michigan, than cash bonds are. And in fact, when you combine it with supervision, I think there's some very good statistics out there that suggest that that's the most effective way to go.
Mhm. Right, right. Releasing someone on their recognizance, and
Yep.
I know it's called different things or done slightly differently in different states, but right, uh, that is the best way to go, and that's how the vast majority of folks are going to succeed, are going to come to court and not be arrested during the pretrial phase, if we only get out of their way and provide them the supports that they need, if they need any at all.
And that's particularly true for low-level crimes, where we end up getting very crowded jails for people who are charged with driving while license suspended and couldn't post a $500 bond.
Mhm.
That's the sort of thing where we waste a lot of money, in my opinion, in the criminal justice system. So let me talk about we've been talking about some on supervision, and you've mentioned the notification. Let's talk about the role of technology in pretrial service supervision. What is
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, that's one very, very good example. That has become, even in the time that, even in the past 4 years since COVID, and probably spurred on somewhat by COVID, but it used to be much more difficult technology-wise to get that notification to folks that they had court or that they had an appointment that they needed to attend. And today's world, I mean, technology has helped that along a lot, immensely. And so it's much, much easier. I can at least say for the state of Illinois, which I know intimately, there's a much higher percentage of folks that are now getting those notifications. And so that's a big win. The other way that I see technology positively impacting is with data collection and analysis. That has been a difficulty for so many and remains a difficulty for many. But I think it's getting easier, and it's getting to where there have been, some successes that can be built upon. You can look at the neighboring jurisdiction and see that they did something. Well, how did you do that? And that, it's a very
Mhm.
collaborative environment that we work in. And so that's one where I'm hopeful that there's going to be continued growth in the coming years.
In Michigan, there's a pretrial often is involved in drug and alcohol testing, and the technology there is changing amazingly. I assume that's a component of this.
It is, though that is not an evidence-based practice in the pretrial phase. So that is
Really?
not something that we encourage. It's done in plenty of jurisdictions, but again, the goals of pretrial being having someone coming to court and not commit new offenses. The goal at that point isn't behavior change, because we're going to have them for such a short period of time. And
Okay.
again, they're presumed innocent. So really the goal in doing drug testing, if somebody is an addict, they're going to test positive. And so it
Yep,
really
they
doesn't tell
are.
us a lot. It doesn't really tell us a lot other than, let's help this court proceeding go along. And then if the person needs additional supports, such as treatment, if they're struggling, then that would be a better decision, is maybe to seek, is treatment needed at this time? Is an assessment appropriate?
You're talking to an old treatment court judge, and I wanted
Mhm.
to test them immediately so that I could find out what level of um, problem we were dealing with, either with a substance use disorder, an opiate use disorder, an alcohol use disorder. Um, I really appreciate that perspective, though, because it's a new one for me, and thank you.
Yeah,
Um,
no problem.
where do you think pretrial service supervision is going in the future?
Pretrial services in the future.
Hmm.
What I hope is that, and I think what NAPS's goals are, is to obviously spread the positive education and knowledge of what are legal and evidence-based practices, what is the best thing to do with folks in the pretrial system, whether that be the system in general, the court players, what are the best practices for each of them to adopt, as well as what are the best techniques and best things to use when working with individuals one-on-one. There are a lot of places in our country that don't have that knowledge, and so I'm hopeful that that will continue to spread. And then the opposite, kind of not the opposite, but part of that, there's often an over-reliance on punitive forms of supervision or detention, and hoping to detain the right folks. We absolutely believe that there are some folks that need to be detained for the safeties of our communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so detain the right folks and then have the others released with the appropriate conditions or no conditions so that they can be the most successful. And so anyway, kind of bringing down some jurisdictions.
Miss that. That's important because part of it is you got to have the space. Many jails are overcrowded, and if you're trying to plunge people in because you've got too many of the wrong people in custody, it makes it more difficult to put the right people in. And I think you're very correct in that. We need to be talking about pretrial from the standpoint of making good decisions about who should be in custody, because it protects society and saves us money.
Right. And that, and it's another piece of the why cash bail doesn't work is there are some very dangerous folks that have access to a lot of money, and then they're back in our communities. Whereas with a no cash bail system, and true detention is, being able to hold those folks that need to be held in custody, and then have the others be out and participating in their defense, maintaining their jobs, maintaining their family ties, all those things that help to keep our community safe.
I think that's exactly correct. And with that, I'd like to thank you for coming on Justice Speaks.
Wonderful.
And it's been a wonderful chance to interview the new executive director of the National Association of Pretrial Services Agency, Wendy Venvertloh.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been an honor.